take their seats, please? People just don't respect my authority. All right, if everybody could please take their seats, we'd like to keep this going. Roger. Can you help me, please? Yeah. Thank you. If everybody could take their seats, please, I would appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and start the second panel now. We're obviously running behind, so we will continue this discussion into the lunch hour, probably till about 1 o'clock or so, maybe a little before that. But then we will start the third panel right on time at 1:30. So without further ado, it's my pleasure now to introduce FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly, who will provide some remarks for us. Thank you.
Okay, how is everyone out there? All right, there we go. There we go. I get some settling of the crowd. Thank you so. So I'm so pleased to be able to kick off the second panel. The FCC has statutory requirements to ensure that all Americans have access to advanced services, including broadband. When I look at broadband coverage maps over time, I'm encouraged to see the progress that's being made in deploying broadband throughout our nation, including rural America. Contrary to some, I see this as a tremendous success story. Providers are investing significant capital to expand service areas and coverage and speed throughout their territories. And the Connect America Fund has begun to provide support for those areas that need additional high-cost support where service is not being offered today. Clearly, we have more work to do, and if we don't distract our good staff, we probably can do more faster. But the maps are still dotted with some white areas, places where service is not being handled by terrestrial broadband. And they are scattered throughout our nation, providing unique challenges. Those underserved areas can have vastly different terrains and population densities. Therefore, when it comes to serving rural America and rural communities, one size does not fit all. At the end of the day, however, the Commission is obligated to ensure that all consumers have access to reasonably comparable service. Fulfilling that obligation may require a range of approaches, including a variety of technologies. So I'm so pleased that this panel will have a variety of providers to reflect that. I hope to learn from today's panelists about what technologies they deploy, where they do and where they don't deploy, and what those technologies are capable of delivering now and in the future. I'm also interested in learning the lessons that they have learned through their firsthand experiences in deploying broadband in rural America. I would like to know how those lessons can impact further universal service reforms. As we all know, we have scarce consumer dollars that need to be addressed in an efficient manner. And I would like to understand whether certain Commission rules need to be streamlined or eliminated because they're impeding rather than promoting broadband deployment. Thank you for participating on this important panel, and I look forward to the informative discussion ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we are going to hear from 8 different individuals representing different technology deployment types. And moderating the panel will be Carol Maddie, Jonathan Chambers, and Alex Menard from the Carol and Alex from the Wireline Bureau, and Mr. Chambers from the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis. I think that's what it's called. Outside the box thinking. And so what we're going to do is Alex here is going to talk for a couple minutes to summarize something we recently launched, requesting expressions of interest from folks interested in building out in rural areas. And then after that, we're going to have a lightning round. And I really do hope that everybody will keep it to 4 minutes to hit the issues that the Commissioner just talked about and what we had talked about earlier, which is sort of what incentivizes you to invest and build out in an area you haven't already served or to continue edging out your network, and what drives the technology choices that you have, that you make when building out. So to kick things off, I will turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Patrick. On January 30th, As part of the Technology Transitions Order and further notice, the Commission invited proposals to bring advanced services to rural America with support from the Connect America Fund. We've received nearly 1,000 expressions of interest from all parts of the country, 49 states, and Puerto Rico. As of last evening, it was 997, and today we posted a link on the Rural Broadband Experiments webpage with a list of each filing and a link directly to the filing, so that that should provide folks easier access to them. We received expressions of interest from rural telephone companies, from rural electric co-ops, from cable and wireless service providers, schools and libraries, research and education networks, and from communities. We remind everyone that decisions about the rural broadband experience will be made on formal proposals submitted to the Commission after the Commission adopts selection criteria and a budget later this year, not on these expressions of interest. Comments on the further notice are due March 31st and replies are due April 14th, but we are here today to hear from the people who are in the field deploying broadband to rural areas.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And so now we'll start our 4-minute lightning round. And we'll do it alphabetically, I think. We'll start with Will Aycock, who's the General Manager for Greenlight Community Broadband for the City of Wilson, North Carolina.
Good morning, and first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the first panel. It was fantastic and pertinent to so much of what we have going on in our community, so it was a pleasure to sit through it. I do wish that I had access to some of Mr. Kelly's precision agricultural technology growing up, because I think it could have kept me out of trouble with my uncle several times, but in any event, I'll move on. The City of Wilson is a city of about 50,000 folks in eastern North Carolina, right along the I-95 corridor. At one time, we were known as the world's largest tobacco market, and today we are known as North Carolina's first gigabit city, thanks to the community broadband network that the city has constructed. Greenlight is the name of that broadband network, and we've been in operation since about 2008. We have around 7,000 connected customers on the network. Those include residential, small office, major employers, pretty much all the community anchor institutions, so our schools and libraries. We also provide all the network connectivity in support of our municipal operations, so supporting public safety, smart grid, AMI, distribution automation, so on and so forth, across our municipal enterprise. Our city council decided to construct this network because they believe that broadband data infrastructure is a critical infrastructure that's required in the modern world, that it is essential to supporting the economic health of our community, improving the quality of life for our citizens, and also just enhancing the delivery of all our other essential city services. So that infrastructure supports all those goals of our council. Since we initially launched the network in 2008, one thing that's been very common is we have a lot of demand, folks wanting us to grow out into the more rural areas of the county. Feel that very painfully myself, because my mother and grandmother both contact me frequently and say, when are you coming out to where we are? And I say, as soon as we can get there. As far as our considerations for expansion, first and foremost in North Carolina, there is a state law that prohibits us from providing services outside of Wilson County, so that's always an overarching consideration for expansion of our services. Beyond that, it is certainly our intent and desire to provide service to everyone that wants to have our service and that we can legally provide service to. So really at that point it comes down to more of a planning issue. How do we plan for the expansion into the more rural areas? Obviously capital availability is essential to that planning. We have to pay as we grow to expand out into the rural territories. Excuse me. So that also means we're looking at proximity to the existing network infrastructure. We are looking at community anchor institutions out in the more rural parts of the county. So where do we need to get fiber to support those community anchor institutions? Where do we have utility infrastructure that needs fiber connectivity from the perspective of SCADA and many other types of new technologies supporting electric, gas, and water? Fiber infrastructure is a superior way to connect that and manage that. So those are some of the considerations. Also, we do consider demand. How many people in a given area have actually contacted us, so we try to keep up with that. As far as the type of technology deployed, we obviously chose fiber, and we are fiber to the home. And that's because we see ourselves primarily as a broadband provider. That is what we're here to do. That is our mission as established by council, so we chose the infrastructure that is most appropriate for providing robust service, both from perspective of capacity as well as from stability. In addition to that, we want to be scalable into the future, and I will should say that our launch of our gigabit residential service in July of 2013 in response to the FCC's Gigabit Cities challenge that was issued a while back is an example of that flexibility because we were able to quickly upgrade electronics and begin providing gigabit service throughout our community because it is scalable in that way. So I'm just over 4 minutes, speed round, sorry about that, but I appreciate it.
That's pretty good. All right. Next, we'll hear from Mike Cook, who's the Senior Vice President for Hughes Network Systems, and there are a couple slides if we can bring them up, please.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the satellite broadband industry. This is, again, an interesting, very interesting day because you're talking about our business. Our business is providing broadband services to the rural communities. Do we have the slides? Yeah, okay, here we go. So the first slide, this one here, is really giving you a timeline of where we're at, and the timeline starts at the bottom. So in about 2008, we started to introduce what we call high throughput satellites. This is a new generation of satellite technology which enables us to offer higher speed services and gives us much more capacity to be able to offer our subscribers. And about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we launched the second generation of high throughput satellites, two satellites that the industry has in operation today, is providing over 200 gigabits per second of capacity. And the most important thing is that you can see from the coverage map that everywhere in the country today we offer at least 5 megabits per second of service. In the darker green areas, we're in the green map, in the darker green areas we're offering today up to 15 megabits per second of download capacity. And we have about 1.5 million subscribers already. And I can tell you that we are adding subscribers at a very rapid rate in all of those areas. To get to that point, the industry had already invested about $2 billion of its own money in the technology. And between us, we're investing about another $1 billion in the next round of high throughput satellites, which is in the blue area here, where we're going to more than double the capacity that we have available. And we're going to be able to provide services up to and probably exceeding 20 megabits per second everywhere in the country. Those new satellites should come on stream in about 2016. We have the next slide. The next slide is really showing you, it's actually penetration. So along the bottom axis we got household density, and along the axis, the y-axis, we have penetration. Don't worry too much about the penetration numbers. But you can see our highest penetration is in the lowest household density areas. So we are the appropriate technology for low household density areas. Why? Because it costs us the same to serve a household in an urban area as it does to serve a household in a rural area where the density of housing is low. For every other technology, you're talking about significant deployment costs. Our estimates, based on the information we have from our partners in the industry, is that wireline technologies really only becomes economic where you have household densities probably in excess of 70 households per square mile. Wireless technologies are more appropriate in lower densities, and again, as you can see, satellite has a natural area and should be an important part of any deployment program going forward. We have the next slide. The summary is really very simple. Satellite technology, satellite broadband technology is available today. We are investing our own money to deploy that technology. We are going to carry on investing our own money to deploy that technology. It's a great service. It's reliable. It provides high speeds. As we continue to develop the technology, the speeds will also go up. The most important thing I think that we have to ask here is that satellite technology is seen to be a part of the solution, and that any plans, programs, and so on that are put forward include the satellite broadband industry in that planning process. Thank you.
4 minutes on the dot. Very good. Okay. Next, we'll hear from Jimmy Copeland, who's the Director of Special Projects for Troy Cablevision, to hear the perspective of some of the small, more rural cable operations.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning, and we appreciate the FCC having a small cable operator from South Alabama here. Not many times we get to make a trip to Washington and speak to such a diverse crowd. Troy Cable was started 29 years ago, and it's right now 4 generations strong, owned by one family. In that particular area, we have now grown in that 29 years to where we serve 4 counties in our footprint. Obviously, that service that we have in that footprint is predominantly in the areas of small towns, small communities in that area. Recently, we were granted a Commerce Department BTOP grant, and in that we added roughly 500 miles of fiber into that footprint out into those rural areas. As a growth part of that process, we also went out and did what's been discussed around here, and that is we created some Wi-Fi hotspots in those geographical areas so there would at least be a location for our school students who all have iPads at this point, but don't have that availability of service, where some of them had to drive 15 to 20 miles just to get back to the library to be able to have service. So in doing so, one of the things that we found that we had been using coaxial for almost 29 years. We still have coaxial in our system, and we still use it and maintain it. But we started looking for a diverse method by which to get the higher speeds of broadband out there. So we tried RFOG. RFOG works fine, but what we found in the really rural areas was a product called GPON, and that's gigabit speeds. So what we are deploying at present is GPON technology, and that technology we're deploying to the side of the home, where in most cases it will provide at least a gigabit of connectivity to the home where the students are, where some businesses are, and such. We have one industry there in our local community that allows their employees to work from home if they have good broadband service. So 2 to 3 days a week they're in the office, and 1 to 2 days a week they're at home working. One of the issues that we see relative to this is that the density of the population meaning homes, is a deterrent for those of us in the private industry to be able to find funding. That typical density is around 20 to 25 homes per mile. Well, when you get out in our rural areas, and by the way, we only have 1 to 2 cities in our entire 5-county area that are considered urban or close to urban. The rest of even our smaller communities are rural in that respect. So when we get out in those rural areas, we already know, because we drove that fiber out to what we know is in our area as substations, co-op substations, so that we could provide that data backhaul for them from the rural areas, so they could maintain that system that they have out there, and then they allow their constituents to see their utility bills over the over the power lines, actually. So collectively, we put that together, and I'm down to 38 seconds, so here I go. The only way that we see any growth in those rural areas is either the state or federal monies being able to impact what's taking place out there. Internal cash flow is a slow build, and in some cases, in most cases, industry has to look at where that money is going to have the best return on the dollar. So there's got to be some private-public work together to make this happen, as we all know here. We also need to get our co-ops in line so that all of them are working on the same sheet of music. I'll keep going if you'd like.
I'll give you 15 more seconds if you can do it.
Well, I don't want to leave it right there, but what I really would like to say is that we've got to look across the board at a lot of things that take place out there. Certainly the poles for the co-ops in the rural areas are not as congested as they are in urban areas. So it should be a cheaper, easier build out there to drive fiber to the home. But in some cases, you find some situations that drive that cost up beyond that, so we wind up going underground.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of co-ops, next we're going to hear from Randy Clinton, who's the general manager for Como Inc. He's also the IT manager for Como Electric Cooperative. Randy.
Patrick, and I want to thank the FCC and the Commission for inviting a small electric co-op to come to Washington, D.C. to talk about our story. Como Electric is a co-op that was founded in 1939, so coincidentally this is our 75th anniversary. And an interesting story is 72 years to the day on Christmas Eve of 2011, we lit the first fiber optics customer on our network, which is the same day that we lit the first house on our electric co-op. We have about 4,000 miles of electric distribution plant serving 32,000 meters in central Missouri, over 2,300 square miles. Our service territory is largely unserved, underserved, and a term I've recently coined, poorly served, with aging copper infrastructure that is at its end of life, and it's really creating a problem for our community and our residences and our businesses and our schools. So that drove our members to reach out to our electric co-op asking for help. They knew they were unserved. They knew that nobody was going to serve them, so they turned to us, the electric co-op. As a co-op, our customers are our owners, so we obviously listen to what they have to say. We did a survey. It turned out it was obvious that our members were lacking the service and very much supported us doing fiber to the home. We selected fiber because it's very important that we did a universal service to 100% of our membership. We launched a pilot project that was about 100 miles of 1,145 passings. We had a certain threshold we had to meet to be able to serve that pilot, to figure out if fiber to the home would be feasible in our service territory. From that, a grassroots effort rose up. We had a threshold that had to be met. We turned it over to our members. They went door to door. We had community meetings. They put yard signs up. We even had community banks step up and pay $100 deposits for their customers to sign up for the service. Needless to say, our pilot project was very successful. Today, that pilot project has double the number of subscribers that we anticipated when we started. Based on that, our board of directors approved a plan to build out all 4,000 miles of our electric distribution system with fiber to the home. Today, we are about complete with phase one, which is the first 1,000 miles, and we just launched phase two on Monday of this week. And an exciting announcement is we're launching rural gigabit service for all of our membership available in April of this year. Not just residences, but small businesses and schools will have access to gigabit services. Schools will have access to gigabit for less than the price of a T1. Our services include broadband, telephone, and IPTV service. And some of the things we look at for expansion, obviously, is we're trying to serve our membership first and foremost. But our members are intertwined in the communities that they live in, and as co-ops in the state of Missouri do not serve inside municipal boundaries typically. We have recently launched expansion into those communities too to bring gigabit services to them. Our goals are service to our members and service to our community. So those are the driving factors of our expansion in our service territory. And finally, Como's not alone. We did submit an expression of interest to become a rural broadband experiment, along with 9 other Missouri electric co-ops and over 100 co-ops nationwide that are interested in serving their membership. If all the co-ops in Missouri that filled out an expression of interest were successful, that would cover over 20% of the land mass of the state of Missouri with fiber to the home services. Thank you.
Thank you. And now from a small co-op in Missouri to a small company called AT&T, Cecil Lara, who is the Director of Network Planning, and he has got a couple of slides you may want to bring up. Cecil.
Yeah, we can bring those up in a minute.
Okay, in a minute. Yeah.
Sure. So I want to thank you. It's an honor and privilege to present before the Federal Communications Commission. Patrick, thank you for allowing me to speak today on behalf of AT&T. AT&T currently owns and operates wireline assets in 22 states across the country. These LEC assets span the entire spectrum. We're not just an urban, suburban served area. We serve rural geographies as well. In fact, the vast majority of AT&T assets or our central offices are classified as rural wire centers. and AT&T footprint contains 30% of the nation's rural households. And they're not always associated with those same rural wire centers. I want to talk to you about our Project VIP announcement. Prior to that announcement, AT&T conducted an asset assessment across the entire portfolio, both wireline and wireless. This assessments range from divesting rural, high-cost, underperforming assets, similar to what some other LECs had done prior to 2012, to structural separation from wireline and wireless, and then finally maximizing broadband share with targeted investments in both wireline and wireless. That last assessment formed our announcement in 2012 for Project VIP, which is a $14 billion multi-year announcement, which includes expanding LTE to 99% of the population, IP broadband to 57 million locations, or 75% of our total franchise, and 1 million business locations passed with fiber. And lastly, a wireline transformation initiative is planned to pivot all of our IP networks, all of our network to IP by 2020. So I tell you that, so I want you to see that AT&T is committed to investing in broadband technologies. However, the nature of these investments depends on a number of factors like we've talked about here. Population density, distance from population and network centers, and geographic topology, to name just a few. And people talk about rural areas kind of consisting of the donut hole and the donut, right? The town center and the outlying area. And while it might be profitable to serve the donut hole, it tends to be more challenging to serve the donut. So AT&T doesn't see any single technology that's any single technology for serving these rural wire centers. It's really an all-above strategy to address these costly deployments. Prospectively, for new deployments, the donut is getting thicker, right? The high-value donut hole or town center portion of that return is getting smaller, while the high-cost areas continue to get larger. This makes it increasingly difficult to leverage traditional solutions. So. Finally, the pace of innovation is compressing the time horizon or useful life of our assets. The risk of network obsolescence is ever increasing. And ultimately, there has to be a return on invested capital, like one of my panelists talked about, that justifies this capital expenditure. Okay? So with that, I want to take you through, we put on the slide here, kind of some challenges we have. We've got a rural wire center here, small population, geographically centered around a town square. Our solution is a CO-based DSLAM serving ADSL 2+ with transport via gigi fiber to a nearby metro. The next one is a large geographic serving area with extended distance from the central office. Here we have a population cluster that's far from the town center, right, with low density, i.e. the donut. Our solution here is wireless IP using UMTS or available LTE spectrum. And the last one is a very rural wire center. I think we have the right one up, do we? Yeah, there you go. Here's a very rural wire center. This wire center is not adjacent to any population centers with hills and valleys. And our partial solution is a wireline IP broadband in the town center with some wireless to serve the extended population. Now, I say a partial solution. The full solution, maybe a complementary solution, would be like one of my panelists talked about, would be satellite. So in conclusion, there's no one solution to serve broadband to all Americans. We will continue to explore new innovative approaches to address the challenges of rural broadband. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Denny Law, who is the General Manager and CEO of Golden West Telecommunications. Denny.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's rural broadband workshop. I have a strong interest in rural broadband initiatives. Besides my professional responsibility as the CEO of Golden West Telecommunications, my family and I reside in Wall, South Dakota, population 818. I believe it is important to ensure that advanced telecommunication services are provided to areas like Wall and other small communities scattered across South Dakota and across all of rural America. Golden West is a rural incumbent local exchange carrier. We serve over 24,500 square miles of rural South Dakota. To put that in perspective, our serving area is bigger than Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware combined. Golden West provides telecommunication services across a very diverse landscape, including small communities as well as farm and ranch land. We also provide service to portions of 5 Native American reservations, as well as areas containing national parks, national grasslands, and national forests. Each of these areas present very unique challenges in meeting the telecommunications needs of customers today as well as their needs in the future. Golden West provides customers with high-quality voice service, broadband access, and video service. Our broadband technologies include DSL, fiber to the premise, as well as cable modems. This panel's been asked to address what incents providers to deploy broadband to new areas, but I also think it's important to expand that question to look at what it takes to get broadband to and keep broadband in all areas. As a network investor and operator, I have to look at not just new areas that will receive broadband for the first time. I have to be thinking about how to manage my budget to upgrade and sustain rural areas that have broadband already. These are the same trade-offs that every service provider makes, and they're necessary to make sure that today's new broadband investments aren't wasted and don't become subpar in the future. When Golden West is determining where and when to invest, whether we are upgrading an existing network or we're expanding broadband into an unserved area, there are several questions we ask ourselves. First, what can we afford to build to deliver the best service to consumers now and for the foreseeable technology horizon? Second, if I build that network, will I be able to maintain it and sustain it over the life of that network? And third, will my customers be able to afford the services that I provide on that network? If you can't affirmatively answer each of these questions, affordability, sustainability, and reasonably priced services for consumers, providers like Golden West are unable to make long-term network investments. A second question that was posed to this panel is what drives the choices in technologies, and there are a lot of factors. I'll address just a few primary themes. The first is network cost. This includes not only my initial construction and deployment costs, but the cost of upgrades and maintenance and how quickly I must need to upgrade those services that customers will require tomorrow. Will future upgrades require totally new construction, electronics upgrades, or can I do it on existing facilities? The second theme is service definition. Can the network do what consumers and society expect of it? As an eligible telecommunications carrier, or ETC, as well as a carrier of last resort, I need to be able to provide voice and broadband services with quality of service and performance metrics included. While we rightly focus on broadband, the capability to provide quality voice and reliable access to things such as 911 has to be viewed as important parts of this platform as well. The third theme is sustainability. We can't focus exclusively on the one-time act of deploying a network. The network I build has a decades-long life, and an investment is wasted if the network and the services that I put over it are not sustainable. If consumers can't afford those services that I provide or can't get access to those services 5 years from now or longer that aren't comparable to what folks in other areas are getting, the network's not sustainable. Now, universal service support has been a key component in promoting sustainability and affordability for rural Americans, and it's important that this program take into account both the one-time act of deploying networks and the ongoing work of delivering reasonably comparable services to consumers at reasonably comparable rates. Thank you for the opportunity again to participate today, and I look forward to the questions later.
Thank you, Denny. Next, we will hear from Ben Moncrief, who is the Director of Government Relations for C Spire. Ben.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here. Typically when I'm here, I'm talking about the wireless business, but I'm very happy to be here today to talk on behalf of a very talented team of folks that are back in Mississippi in the process of deploying C Spire's first fiber to the home 1 gigabit network. C Spire, as I mentioned, has had a 26-year focus in the wireless industry. Today we're the 6th largest wireless carrier in the country with just under 1 million subscribers, serving all of Mississippi, portions of Tennessee, Alabama, and Northwest Florida. We're privately held, which has a lot of advantages, but one of those is that we can take a longer-term focus with regard to the markets we serve. We don't have to worry about a capital investment upending Wall Street expectations on a quarter-by-quarter basis, and that gives us some flexibility in taking on some burdens that we really have enjoyed taking on to provide the best level of service for our customers. I thought the best way to get us into this discussion was to just tell you briefly the story of how C Spire came to the decision to deploy 1 gigabit fiber to the home in Mississippi. Several years ago, as a result of, let's call it, dysfunction in the backhaul and special access markets, C Spire Wireless took on the burden of building its own backhaul network to serve fiber to the site, and in particular provide Ethernet backhaul for our 4G LTE deployment that serves our current operating area. As a result of that, we wound up with thousands of miles of fiber in the ground in Mississippi. That today continues to serve our wireless network, serves some additional wireless providers, and a few businesses around the state, folks that are moving a lot of data. We began looking about 15, 16 months ago at other things we could do with that network, other services we might be able to provide. We began exploring various applications, and then along came Google Fiber's deployment in Kansas City, and we paid very close attention to that. We analyzed in particular what they were doing with their demand aggregation or crowdsourcing. We've come to call it demand aggregation. I think it's probably a more accurate description of what we're doing there. And we looked at whether that could be replicated in less densely populated areas, and in particular if it could be replicated in some of the markets we serve in Mississippi, and our conclusion was that it can. So in September of last year, on September 24th, we announced the Get Fiber Fast initiative in Mississippi. 1 week later, 55 cities, small municipalities, counties, regional economic development groups showed up in our office ready to talk about it. So there's a level of excitement, we think, in Mississippi for gigabit fiber-to-the-home services. We went through an RFI process. We received proposals. And on November 4th of last year, we selected 9, they were all municipalities, 9 cities that would be in our initial round of fiber-to-the-home gigabit deployment. We've been working with those 9 cities. It is truly a grassroots effort. We provide marketing materials like these, and folks down on the ground in those communities are out walking, knocking on doors, putting out door hangers, encouraging folks in their community to sign up for gigabit services. 1 month after the announcement, on December 4th, we launched a pre-registration process which allows individuals within those 9 communities to go online or go to a local C Spire Wireless retail location or other remote locations that are put up in those communities and sign up. That takes a $10 deposit and say they want fiber to the home in their community. We established thresholds based on density of the housetops of either 35 or 45%. And as of today, we have 5 communities within 4 of those cities are already gone green, as we like to say. They have already met their thresholds. We're wrapping up the detailed engineering for those communities, and we expect, or our goal is to have the first homes connected in July of this year. So a very compact process, and we think that the demand aggregation component of that really started and catalyzed the conversation and the demand for that service. I'm going to run over but just a second, but 2 important points. The first, there are 2 big obstacles that we see. There are a lot of things you've got to work through, but 2 big obstacles. The first is the significant capital investment required for the last mile, right? How do you overcome that? And we think the rural broadband experiment process and what's been proposed thus far, and certainly what's reflected in our expression of interest, goes directly to that. How can we reduce the capital that has to be outlaid in the beginning in order to reach some of these harder to reach last mile homes? The second piece is community collaboration. And we think that the demand aggregation model that we've used, that others have used in other places, is a very effective tool, one, for getting communities to dig in themselves and learn about the benefits of gigabit fiber to the home and services that can come later with that. But secondly, that it solves the risk problem so that you don't build and then have no subscribers. So we'd encourage the Commission to look very closely at those 2 components.
Last but not least, Alex Phillips, CEO of HighSpeedLink.net. Alex. And we have slides here if you could bring them up.
All right, thanks a lot. I'm going to try to go through my long-winded slides as quickly as possible. I just wanted to kind of introduce myself a little bit. I'm the CEO of High Speed Link. We're a fixed wireless service provider in Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, started in 2002. I'm also on the board of directors of the Wireless ISP Association, which is an advocacy group that supports its members regarding the deployment of wireless services. As one of my job duties on that committee, on that board, I'm the FCC chair, and so I'm probably more familiar with FCC-related matters than most of our membership. In another life, I had a business where we started dial-up in 1995, and so back then the challenges were just educating folks as to why they wanted to use the internet. And one of our first broadband customers was the Rosetta Stone, headquartered in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And they just needed a 5 megabit connection, and we had to actually go to the internet and try to figure out how to do that, and did, and was able to build that for them. Go to the next slide, please. Let's see, what is a WISP? So a wireless ISP is a company that uses microwave technology to deliver broadband as a last mile solution and sometimes as a middle mile solution. They're usually a small to medium-sized business with customers ranging from 500 subscribers up to 150,000 subscribers. As a CEO, and probably many of my brethren are the same, I have done it all. I climb towers, I do installations, I've done sales calls, I've done tech support calls. I know every inch and end of this business. Our industry is a primarily user of the unlicensed spectrum, 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 3.65 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, 24 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz. If it's unlicensed and we can get data across it, we're going to use it. We also use licensed spectrum for point-to-point connections, 11 gigahertz, 6 gigahertz, 18 gigahertz, 80 gigahertz. Some of our membership also uses 2.5 gigahertz for multi-point licensed connections. We all have some type of connectivity back into the internet. Our company has 2 fiber optic connections in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Our goal is to get the internet from where it is to where people need it. Our industry is predominantly rural. If you see cows, chickens, lots of trees, we're there providing services. There's approximately 2,000 or more of us, as we have recorded, in the U.S., serving over 3 million businesses and residential users. Research is now showing that maybe that number might be 6 million, but we're still working on that. Many of our WISPs are starting to look at fiber in conjunction with their microwave networks, building fiber to connect POPs, using microwave technology to get to locations, and then using last mile fiber. Basically, we go where people don't want to go. Obstacles that we have, financial limitations can be a small part. I know when I got started in 2000, my banker looked at me and asked me what it was I was doing and didn't understand anything I was telling him. Today, it's a lot more historical data on what's going on in the wireless broadband industry. Another challenge is knowing where the demand is. The National Broadband Map has been very useful in that. Local government ordinances can sometimes be challenging. I know that many of my people in Virginia have been working with a lot of the state and local people to try to get ordinances passed that allow them to do things without being encumbered. Unfair government subsidies that have allowed telephone companies to use government funding actually to compete with us. Current government subsidies that have requirements for ETC status that many of our membership and our people in our areas don't have. Current stimulus projects and past stimulus projects where organizations have built services that overbuild on existing service providers have been very challenging to deal with. Things that we need, WISPs can scale to demand pretty quickly. More spectrum, more spectrum, more spectrum. TV white space has been a hallmark for our organization to try to get more access to that. 3550 gigahertz, more 5 gigahertz for the workhorse that allows us to build networks out to rural areas, remote areas. Making taxpayer-owned infrastructure available and leveraged. The state of Virginia has an organization called the Center for Innovative Technology, who's been very pioneering and
Can we wrap it up?
compiling assets that are available to us. And that is, just real quickly, WISPs offer 5 to 10 megabit services in rural areas, up to 1 gigabit in urban markets. We provide telephone services, 911 capabilities. We deliver broadband speeds that allow folks to have a la carte TV services and everything else that everybody wants to do on the internet. And that's the end.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you all to all the presentations. We now have plenty of time for questions and answer. We've gotten several online. If folks in the room have questions for any of these providers, again, we have a microphone in the room. I'll start with one online and then turn it over to some of our panelists, and then I have more here too. So the first question is, with fiber to the home build-out, does the co-op offer lit or dark fiber? Has the build-out expanded offerings by providers on dark fiber? Anyone? Does that make any sense? All right, going to the next question. Yep.
I'm not sure I heard the question.
The question was, with fiber to the home build-out, does the co-op offer lit or dark fiber? Has the build-out expanded offerings by, I assume, other providers on dark fiber?
We provide lit service, retail service. We also do dark fiber services for mobile backhaul, schools, businesses that want point-to-point connections. But the cooperative formed a subsidiary to be the retail provider of the services over the fiber.
Okay, and then one that is probably relevant to some of you. Will we care about quality, latency or jitter measurements, or is speed all we need? So I guess the question is, depending on the different technology types, in addition to the speed down and up, what's the impact on latency or jitter measurements, or is speed all we need is the question.
I would say at AT&T, as we're looking to leverage our broadband footprint for business applications, that's absolutely a consideration, where latency and jitter impacts the SLAs that our enterprise applications want, right? I mean, this initial footprint or initial deployments were all about consumer-centric applications. As we look to leverage enterprise applications on these assets, we've got to tweak and design it a little differently.
We spend all our life really making sure that our customers' applications work well. And it isn't only about speed. It's about the way in which the network handles the applications. If you think about jitter, jitter is very important if you're dealing with a voice application, for example. We support voice. We actually launched a voice service in the middle of last year. If you want to go and try it, it's a very, very good quality service, and people are switching to use that as their primary voice service at home. So it's the way you deal with the applications in the network, and we have lots and lots of experience in making sure that our customers' applications work well.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
My only response would be that we operate a 10 gigabit middle mile network with 9 hub sites and 10 cabinets, so that between the customer premise, either a business or home, then there's really only 2 pieces of electronics that are going to go out or could affect that. So you're not having so many hops in that particular situation for our service.
And maybe just tag on in regards to the quality of service question. Speed is an integral component in terms of a customer's experience using broadband, but speed alone isn't the only answer. Certainly, we're all in the business of wanting to try to provide as much business or much speed as possible, but when you look at the applications that customers are placing on top of that network, the quality of service plays somewhat every bit as important of a role to the experience that customer is going to have, in addition to the speed. Obviously, you've got to have the capacity, but if there are not quality of service metrics that go along with that, their specific applications, depending on what they're doing, whether it be business-based applications or other items, won't meet their needs. So speed is one equation, but it isn't by any means the whole solution.
Okay. Carol or John?
I've got a lot of questions.
Is her mic
Is this
on?
on?
Yep.
Okay. My first question is for the gentleman from AT&T. You said that the company did a, assessment throughout the footprint for Project VIP, and you determined some areas you would be doing, wireline DSL type service. Some areas you'd be focusing on wireline, and some areas satellite may be appropriate. What exactly are the breakpoints between the two? You talked about density and distance from existing customers, denser population areas. So just for instance, going between wireline and wireless, where's the breakpoint specifically?
So we looked at our central office application, so that sort of that donut that I talked about. So as we looked at the geography and we said, can we put an asset, can we put an investment in the central office that can cover that sort of donut hole, then we took wireless, we looked at our wireless assets and looked at, can the wireless assets cover those sort of the donut component of the geography. And so that combined sort of complementary approach gave us a line of sight to maximizing our broadband share, and in turn sort of triggered the investment of 99% of our footprint getting wireless coverage.
But could you be more specific in terms of what the density characteristics are where you would be serving with wireless as opposed to wireline? Like customers per, households per square mile.
I don't have that, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then I've got a similar...
Just to follow that with maybe some others, because a gentleman from Hughes said that out of a business case for wireline would be at a 70 household per square mile. Whereas if you look at Como's footprint, I don't know, I'm guessing you don't cover anywhere where there's 70 households per square mile, and yet you're building out fiber to the premise to areas where there's maybe only a few households per square mile in your most remote areas. Again, C Spire is looking at areas which are maybe less densely populated than a traditional fiber to the premise kind of a build. So to just pick up on Carol's question and ask others as to how you look at it, there's not a rule of thumb, clearly, because otherwise, Como wouldn't have done what it's done. But how do you all look at the population density, or where it makes sense, or how you might make that determination to build?
I'll take a shot at that. Population density isn't as significant a factor for us as is the community demand. As I said, our fiber network goes fiber to the site. Some of those sites are not in densely populated areas at all. Certainly if they're along major highways or interstates, there may not be a city center or town center nearby. So I think for us, the real question is there a level of sort of subjective community support, and also is there an objective measurable demand for the product there? That makes it easier for us to price out and take into account how long of a term investment are we making.
I'd like to try to take from a wireless perspective, we've got customers that call us up and they want service, and we'll send a technician out there, and they'll say they don't have line of sight to one of our mountaintop locations, but their neighbor does. And so we will pick up 3 customers, and so we'll build out for 3 customers in a small neighborhood area, giving a homeowner some type of an incentive to let us to build a transmitter site on their house to offer services to them as well as their neighbors. And so, we've got economics in the wireless industry that, 3 customers is really all we need to build out to you. But we do look for, higher density areas, but like I said, we just don't have that. We've got to cover 15-mile radius, and everybody inside that coverage area is really a customer to us, wherever they are.
I can add a few things. One thing unique to cooperatives is that we are not-for-profit, so we're also used to building plant that lasts a very long time. One of our selection criteria for fiber optics was that we knew it was future-proof, that it would last 20, 25, 30 years. In fact, we have fiber optics on our system that we, of course, leverage to deliver service to our members that's been on our system for approaching 15 years, and we're still using it today. So between leveraging our existing fiber, our existing assets, our existing poles, we have the interface with the membership, we have the billing systems in place, the customer service. We have a lower return on investment expectation. If we're improving our community and improving our members' lives, we don't need a 18 to 20% return on investment. We're satisfied with a small return on investment and improving our members, knowing that even improving our area might improve our electric load, might bring in new customers, new industry, and the electric, we can't not look at combining this with our smart grid network. We need to communicate not just with our substations, but also with downline electrical devices and eventually with all the meters. So combining all those things together, and the last fact would be where we do serve density, we're willing to subsidize the less dense areas with the very dense areas. So we're willing to spread that investment across our entire membership 100% and average it across our entire system.
I would also add, from the perspective of demand aggregation, obviously we are a nonprofit, being a municipality, and so we have other goals we're looking to achieve with expanding the network. But from the perspective of the citizens in these more rural areas, they're doing the demand aggregation for us. They're going out, they are rallying the support in their neighborhood, in their vicinity, and coming to us. So it can very much become a situation where we're having an interactive conversation to say, hey, we want to get there. We're on this time, sort of phased approach for infrastructure deployment. But when they're doing the demand aggregation, it can help expedite that process in some areas.
And I'd maybe just touch on it from an incumbent local exchange carrier. Certainly demand and density play key factors in that, and we have to look at that when we evaluate where can we afford to place various services. But at the same time, I don't have the luxury of saying I'll just deploy to this town and not everybody else in the surrounding area. Ultimately you end up with very much of a have and have-not scenario in terms of deployment. The second thing I would add to that regards to sustainability over a period of time, in just my small company, we've got roughly 14,000 miles of plant. And in order to do effective technological changes over time, I can't replace all 14,000 miles in a day, a month, a year, or a series of years. It takes a long time to replace that, so we bite off chunks at a time, knowing that hopefully that the demand and density is going to be there, but also knowing that it's part of an overall investment for 10, 20, 30 years.
Great. I know Carol has more questions, but we have a line of folks here, so let's make sure, state your name and the question, please.
Mark West, Mountain Area Information Network. I have a quick question for Mr. Phillips. ETC status is burdensome for small wireless internet providers. Is there a way in which, through your organization, small wireless internet service providers can band together to have ETC status as a group?
Well, I mean, it's really up to you if you want to have a cooperative. I know that one of our members in Washington State is putting together a co-op. Some of the things that we're discussing with the FCC is to see if there's any possible way to get a national ETC status. All these things are just questions. We're not really, we don't have any complete answers yet. But the ETC status is a state-by-state requirement, and there is no one answer that can give you a nationwide coverage in this area. So co-ops are definitely an option that anybody can do. We'll be more than happy to give you any kind of help we can.
For those here or watching online, ETC is Eligible Telecommunications Carrier, which is a statutory term in the Communications Act. So you have to be an ETC under the law to get access to universal service funds. So for those who don't know what ETC is, next question.
Hi, my name is Liz Zuko, and my question is for Randy. You stated that you are a nonprofit, and I believe that you said that your margins were around 18%. I could be wrong on that. But my specific question is, how much, since you're an electric co-op, how much of the broadband costs are you underwriting with the electric piece and or vice versa? In other words, can you give us some percentage splits so that a broadband-only provider might understand how you're possibly underwriting the deployment of fiber to the home?
Well, when we took the idea of this to our board of directors, one of the directives that they gave us was that the electric rates will not subsidize the broadband business. So the broadband business has to stand on its own. That's part of the reason we did demand aggregation. We did pre-sales of our project. We had to have a certain level of take rate before we would build it, so it had to be sustainable on its own. So we do not do any subsidization across from the electric co-op to the broadband.
My name is Jim Bubar. My question is more directed to the FCC people who are here. I don't know if that's permitted, but my question is, there's been so many expressions of interest shown, nearly 1,000 expressions of interest. My question is, how much money is actually going to be made available, and how many applications do you anticipate granting when the formal proposals are submitted?
It's a real easy question to answer because at this point nothing has been decided.
Aloha, Sean McLaughlin, Access Humboldt. I'm not going to ask my same question again, but I would love to hear any responses. But I have two other just general questions. One is, with the amount of Universal Service Fund support that has been poured into Connect America Fund, high-cost funds, where did all that money go, and why isn't the problem solved? I guess just generally, or maybe that's a question about, does that mechanism not work? My second question is, in terms of local governments who carry the burden of the cost of acquiring and maintaining public rights-of-way, how do you propose that local governments are compensated for use of those rights-of-way? Thank you.
Anybody on the second question? Or the first question?
On the second question, the local governments don't need to provide a right-of-way for satellite technology.
I'll take a quick stab at the second one, which is local rights of way is always a unique issue that varies a lot by community. At the same time, when you're dealing with public right-of-way, I think you're at some point in time dealing with a public issue or a public good, a societal good, and there has to be some type of arrangement. And I think I've certainly seen this in South Dakota. By and large, our access to right-of-way is available at a reasonable or understanding the social purpose that the services that we provide also benefit. In regards to your first question about where did the USF go and does it not work and why did all that money get poured in there, I could spend a long time here explaining a dissertation on that. My answer to you is in terms of the deployment of the network, I don't think there's anybody up here that's not going to tell you that deploying quality network and sustainable network is an expensive proposition. Where I live in rural South Dakota, it's an incredibly expensive proposition. And I guess, jokingly, I'll tell you, if you want to see where it went, come to South Dakota, I'll show you.
All right. One more question, and then I'm sure we'll get back to Carol's list.
Thank you. It's Garland McCoy, and I just had a quick question first for Randy, and then do you all have any of the content delivery networks that are part of what you're building out as partners with you?
Are you referring to like Netflix or?
Exactly. I was just with the Netflix people, but I mean, any of the content?
We don't currently, no.
You don't?
No.
Okay, it's interesting. And I guess with Alex, you partnering with them at all with your WISPs or?
Well, that's a very good question. A lot of folks have asked about that, and because we're all small businesses, I know when I asked the question to Netflix, I just didn't make muster. I don't have enough traffic.
Right, it's 15,000 or something that they're looking for.
And it's unfortunate because when you look at the type of users, I mean, I know that that your cable operators have customers that use Netflix, but they already have their own level of content available. Many of my customers show up at the door, want internet hooked up at their house. They want it for their smart TV so they can have Netflix, and so 9 out of 10 of them will ask, what speed network, what speed connection do I need for my Netflix? And we offer that speed. We provide them that level of service, but we could provide so much better quality service if we could have content delivery, on our network. And most of our customers are probably the predominant customer of Netflix, the people in the rural areas.
Right. So it's just a matter that's obviously one of the things. In fact, I talked to you, Patrice, about is sort of building for the network as it's going to look, the architecture 5 years forward, 10 years forward, where your partner, when you keep talking about this public sector, private sector partnership, will be an aggregate of these content companies that will want to access customers, and by so doing, help build out a WISP, help bring fiber to your schools and libraries, partner up with you in exchange for, utility closet. They'll underwrite a large part of this, because they have to, they've got to start caching further out. They've got to come into these areas in order to reach, it's just too much congestion now, and right now. And then when you get ultra high def, 4x, 8x. Anyway, so I was just wondering if you,
you're really, again, this is a whole other topic. We could talk for hours and hours, but there are fundamental problems with the delivery of content, of video content specifically. If you were to turn off every broadcast television, every cable TV service, and everything came across the internet between 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock p.m. On the East Coast, the internet will probably come to a crashing halt, because it's just an inefficient method to have single points of sources that provide the service to the end user. Being able to deliver content at different times of the day, push content, it's a whole different thing there. But yes, there's a lot of opportunities there for improvement.
Yeah, the hub and spoke is.
So I just want to move on to the next set of questions. Carol, I think you have a question, and then we'll have, or John Chambers, and then we'll have another question in the room.
Thanks. And if I didn't say so before, thank you all for coming here. I think the 8 of you represent a nice cross-section of what we saw in the expressions of interest, which is, as people have mentioned, 1,000 expressions of interest. What has struck me in looking through the expressions of interest, and I've read several dozen, but not anywhere near all 1,000, is a real diversity of expressions, a real diversity of communities, carriers, others who want to try to build out broadband in rural areas. And so my slow pitch, long wind-up question, really gets to how the FCC, not just in this rural broadband experiment, but on an ongoing basis, how it ought to solicit and evaluate local community input. This was mentioned on the first panel by several participants. I know several of you build networks in your community, so you're part of your communities. And, you know, for us, you sit here in Washington, whether or not there's broadband in a local area, you know, it's a color on a map. But for all of you and the folks of this, you know, this workshop is designed to address today, this is livelihood, it's education, it's creativity, imagination, it's access for your communities, for your kids, for the economic development of the community. So how should we, I'm going to start with you, Ben, because you said we ought to look maybe at demand aggregation. How should we, not just for the expressions of interest of the experiment, because an experiment is meant to teach us something about the way we ought to act, the way we ought to set policy in the future. Chairman mentioned we have two ways, we have policy and we have ways to spend money. So how should we get community input into how the universal service funds should be spent in communities? Because in many cases we might have a situation where there's competing providers, but only competing providers if there's some money to be put towards it. As several of you have mentioned, you're not going to get broadband in some of these areas unless there is some federal support, some state support. So again, long, slow pitch question, but I think as important a question as any I can think of for you all to answer.
You're right. That's the most important question, I think, from the Commission's perspective. From our experience, a statewide, state-level effort to get out there and say this product and then describing it with gigabit fiber to the home. It's also offering video and phone for folks who want it. But describing the product that could be available and then bringing some folks who can, for lack of a better term, evangelize a bit about what the potential applications are. In Mississippi, the ability for remote health monitoring, the VA, the fellow from the VA who was here showing that video, that type of application resonates substantially in Mississippi. The ability to access quality health care remotely, where people are otherwise having to travel hundreds of miles from the Mississippi Delta to Jackson. But to talk about the sorts of applications that would be enabled that they don't have access to today, I think really spurs the librarian. I mean, that's what our experience was in some of these 9 cities. The librarian in the city, the IT director at the school, go to the mayor and say, we got to do this. And then a week later, they show up for a workshop. So at a state level, in a state the size of Mississippi, I think you can get a pretty good indication and you can generate community support by just going in, announcing, and a few weeks later showing up and doing a workshop. You'll get, as we did, a very good feel for the level of enthusiasm and the specific needs and desires of those communities.
I think John's question, though, is a little bit more nuanced, which is we set policy at a national level.
Yeah.
And the question is, as we do that, is how do we more effectively, if we can, take the input of the local communities in general into the development of our policy making? Is that a fair statement, John? As opposed to just sort of course their perspectives are important when your businesses are going out there trying to, make your business work. But from a policy making effort at a national level, what's the most effective way that we can get that input into the decisions that we make for regulatory decisions or for, our programs that provide
We're going to have to put not too fine a point on it. The FCC has a budget for universal service. We're going to spend money. We're going to spend money in high-cost areas. And evaluating how we should spend that money, that includes not just modeling, not just maps, not just some minimum level of service that we would require, but community input as to what projects we ought to fund. I think it's an important question. I think it's a tough question for us as to how to really effectively evaluate community input.
represent a lot of these communities and populations that you're talking about. So I think that this workshop is clearly a start down those roads. Each of us is plugged into larger networks back in our communities, in our states. I'm sure we know people. We are interacting with these folks. With perhaps not the folks on this panel, but nonetheless people like us who represent these local communities who are doing different novel things. I think we're an inroad to introduce you to have independent conversations with folks in the community, and you have to reach out. Much like when we were planning our network, reaching out to the stakeholders in our community, I believe the SEC needs to do something similar. When you're talking about school superintendents, when you're talking about police chiefs and fire chiefs and local business owners, there's interest. 1,000 applications. Each one of those represents a conduit back into a community. So I think the mechanism is there. It's just the realization that you have to reach back out in those ways through those conduits and then go beyond the people who submitted the applications, getting into those communities. And it may not be an efficient process from the perspective of the FCC, but I do think it's a critical process. And getting that, unabashed, unabridged perspective of the people who live in these communities really is important.
I'd like to add one note there regarding the policy side of it, in that technology neutral, I think, is a very good thing to consider. What's the most cost-effective solution for an area? So it may be fiber, it may be wireless, maybe mailing CDs to somebody with the post office, but anyhow, the bottom line is, technology neutral policy, I think, allows for innovation to come into play and provide the best solution, which is in many cases, the most cost-effective solution.
Can I maybe paraphrase your question a little bit? Because I think the question you're asking is, how do you prioritize which communities you provide support to? And I think it's important, again, to understand that there is at least one technology solution that is available everywhere that doesn't require that level of prioritization. And again, taking the point that was just made, we think it's very important that in providing support to build out broadband in these communities, that you don't, at the same time you're doing that, destroy the competitive situation that already exists. So we're very keen to see that you don't distort, in a sense, the playing field. So our suggestion, again, is certainly to ensure that all of the technologies are adequately supported in any plan that you put together.
So we are running out of time, and I want to make sure that this very patient person is able to ask her question.
Actually, I don't have a question, but I wanted to acknowledge all of the speakers and add one more seat at that table. Tribal-owned telecommunication companies. And my name is Madonna Peltier-Uwaki, and I'm president of Turtle Island Communications. We do engineering primarily with tribal nations, and I looked at the agenda. We traveled from Minneapolis, my husband and business partner, and represented several tribes in the expressions of interest that were submitted for the Next Generation Network experiments. And what I wanted to ask the Federal Communication Commission is to consider those applications in the discussion that's being had today about the demographics of Indian country, the counties, the populations, the poverty levels, the young age groups, and the commitment from community. Those are typically undertaken with great input from communities when a tribe recognizes that their services, their infrastructure, there is no infrastructure, it's antiquated, or it's not going to meet what the next generation network transition is from TDM to IP technology. The only way that those things are happening is when tribes have a stake in the ownership. So what I would ask that the commission recognize is tribal-owned telecommunication companies providing gigabit speed to their businesses and residents as a business, and creating that business model that incorporates the way that all business models are created, but the high cost fund component. We didn't hear a lot about that today, but we all know that without that high cost fund, any of these businesses operating in rural America could not sustain themselves. So I wanted to make that point and ask the commission to take interest in the tribal-owned companies and recognize that they have really engaged their communities in making these kind of big decisions to go into this business, because if they don't, the chances of them ever having these types of services will never happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've just got one quick comment relative to Jonathan's question over there. In most of our rural areas, in our geographical areas, we have a built-in component. Those are typically county-run community centers where your older population comes for support. And then number two, most of those rural communities have volunteer fire departments, which is then a conglomeration of a group strategically placed within that geographical service area. Those are two basic locations you could go to get to the forefront of what is needed, of what's there, what's not there. And the other side of the coin, where you get the smaller, younger input, would be through our schools. If we're handing out iPads, those superintendents have to know pretty much how many folks and where they are, where they have service, and then how close that service is to them if it's not available there at their home. So that was our purpose in putting the Wi-Fi spots at the community centers and volunteer fire departments, so that those kids would have an opportunity. I think that data is there. It's just a matter of reaching out to the proper source to find that data, and then you'll get a feedback from that data.
So we're about out of time. Carol, did you want to conclude with anything?
No, I mean, obviously, just sort of taking away and summarizing some of the themes that we've heard. Obviously, I've heard, from various members of the panel that, community involvement and community demand aggregation is very important. I've heard that, being able to leverage existing assets and work off of infrastructure that you may have, from various sources is really, really important. I've heard differing perspectives on, the perspective of the nonprofits and the cooperatives may be different, and those that are privately held may be different than those that are publicly traded companies. And I think this is giving us all a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed this panel.
We've gotten some questions online about the expressions of interest that have been filed in the process, and I just want to reiterate, in case folks missed the beginning of this session, which Alex went through the process, that we've received the expressions of interest. We also have an open further notice of proposed rulemaking, where we're asking questions about what the budget for those things should be, what the criteria should be for selecting the expression for different projects that we may eventually fund. None of those decisions have been made. To Carol's answer, folks are welcome to comment in our docket, which is 1090. Feel free to send any of us an email if you don't know how to do that. And then ultimately, the budget for the projects and the criteria will be something set by Commissioner O'Reilly and other commissioners at the commission level, who will be making that determination in an order later this year. I also want to say we do have a technology center, which is right around the corner and up the hall, where we have various technology demonstrations. If you're interested during the lunch hour, I know that the folks from Hughes or Viasat may have some demonstrations of satellite. There may be some other demonstrations going on in that room. And we will convene back here in 50 minutes at 1:30 to have a discussion with our colleagues from the states about state strategies to tackle these issues. But please join me in thanking these fantastic panelists today. Yeah, mail it.